"Ma'am, keep your hands where we can see them." The voice thundered through the rain before the front door exploded inward beneath the force of a steel battering ram, sending splinters skidding across the hardwood floor. Red and blue lights flashed violently through the windows of the small brick house at the end of Maplewood Drive, painting the walls in frantic color while neighbors peeked through curtains with half-awake fear in their eyes. Naomi Carter froze near the kitchen counter, one hand still wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with cold coffee from her overnight hospital shift. She had been home less than 40 minutes. Her navy blue scrubs were wrinkled from 14 straight hours in the emergency room, and faint stains from antiseptic and exhaustion clung to the fabric. Another crash echoed through the hallway as Boots stormed into the living room. Clear left. Kitchen secure. Move, move. Flashlights swept across framed family photos, old bookshelves, and neatly folded blankets on the couch. One beam caught the birthday cake sitting untouched on the dining table beside a single candle that had never been lit. "Happy 68th birthday," Mama was written in uneven pink frosting across the top. Naomi's eyes flicked toward it for only a second before another command snapped through the house. "Get on the floor now." More officers poured in behind the first wave, dark rain jackets dripping onto the polished which she had spent Sunday morning cleaning. The smell of wet leather, cold air, and adrenaline swallowed the warmth of the home almost instantly. Naomi slowly lowered the mug onto the counter. Her heartbeat stayed steady even while laser sights danced across her chest. Outside, thunder rolled low across the Dallas sky. Chief Daniel Mercer stepped through the broken doorway last. Tall, silver-haired, jaw tight enough to crack stone, he moved with the confidence of a man used to entering dangerous places. His eyes scanned the room once before settling on Naomi. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked smaller than the suspect profile he'd reviewed an hour earlier. No weapon, no panic, just a tired black woman standing barefoot on cold tile. Beneath flickering kitchen lights, Officer Ryan Keller approached quickly from the hallway. "House perimeter is locked down, Chief. No movement from the rear exit." Mercer gave a short nod without taking his eyes off Naomi. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe this property is connected to an active federal investigation." Naomi inhaled slowly through her nose. Rain tapped against the broken doorway behind them in uneven rhythm. "You came into my house with 30 officers for a nurse who just got off work?" she asked quietly. One younger cop, near the staircase, shifted uncomfortably. Another officer overturned a storage bin near the couch, spilling old photo albums across the floor. A framed picture cracked loudly beneath his boot. Naomi flinched at the sound before catching herself. Mercer noticed. His gaze drifted briefly toward the shattered frame lying upside down beside the coffee table. "Search everything," he ordered flatly. "Nobody leaves until we know exactly who she is." Naomi looked directly at him then, calm enough to unsettle the room more than anger ever could. "That's the problem," she said softly. "You already decided who I was before you walked through my door." The house fell strangely quiet after that, except for the distant hiss of police radios and rainwater dripping from jackets onto the floor. The officers spread through the house with controlled urgency, opening drawers, checking closets, photographing every room as rainwater continued dripping from their boots onto the hardwood floor. Naomi remained kneeling near the kitchen entrance exactly where they had ordered her to stay, her hands resting calmly on her thighs while blue and red lights flickered across her tired face. The digital clock above the microwave blinked 2:17 a.m. in soft green numbers. Somewhere upstairs, a cabinet door slammed shut hard enough to shake the ceiling. Chief Daniel Mercer slowly moved through the living room, studying the space with narrowed eyes. Nothing matched the profile he had expected. No hidden weapons. No stolen cash. No signs of panic or escape. The house smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, old books, and hospital disinfectant carried home on Naomi's clothes. A knitted blanket rested neatly across the couch arm beside a pair of reading glasses and a Bible filled with colored bookmarks. One wall held framed nursing certificates and faded family photographs stretching back decades. Naomi's mother appeared in almost every one of them, smiling proudly beside graduations, church picnics, and holiday dinners. Officer Ryan Keller stepped carefully around shattered glass near the coffee table and lifted one of the fallen albums from the floor. Several loose photographs slid free. In one, Naomi stood in front of Parkland Memorial Hospital wearing scrubs and holding the hand of an elderly patient wrapped in a Dallas Cowboys blanket. In another, she sat beside a hospital bed reading to a little boy with an oxygen tube beneath his nose. Ryan swallowed quietly before setting the album back down. "Chief," another officer called from the hallway. "You need to see this." Mercer turned immediately and followed the flashlight beam toward the rear of the house. Naomi watched him go without saying a word. Her eyes looked heavy now, not fearful, just exhausted in a way that settled deep into the bones. The hallway walls narrowed toward a small room at the back of the house. The officers entering ahead of Mercer suddenly slowed their pace. One lowered his flashlight. Another removed his gloves silently. Mercer stepped inside and stopped cold. It was not a hidden office or storage room. It was a memorial. Medical bills sat stacked neatly beside funeral pamphlets on a small wooden desk. A hospital bracelet hung from a lamp beside an urn surrounded by candles that had long since burned out. On the wall above it were dozens of handwritten thank you cards taped carefully in rows. "Thank you for staying with my father when nobody else would. Thank you for praying with our daughter before surgery. Thank you for treating my husband like family." Mercer read them slowly while thunder rolled outside. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Chief," Ryan said softly from behind him. Dispatch confirmed the anonymous tip came from a burner phone. Mercer did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the wall. One card near the center looked newer than the others. The handwriting was shaky. "You sat beside my mother for 6 straight hours after her stroke because she was afraid to die alone. I will never forget your kindness." Mercer exhaled slowly through his nose. The silence inside the room felt heavier than the storm outside. Then his eyes drifted upward toward the hallway wall just beyond the memorial room entrance. And for the first time since entering the house, something inside him visibly shifted. Mounted carefully beneath a soft brass light hung a framed identification plaque partially hidden behind family photographs. Mercer stepped closer instinctively. The reflection from his flashlight slid across polished glass, and the color drained from his face. Chief Daniel Mercer stepped closer to the framed plaque, as if his body moved before his thoughts could catch up. The beam from his flashlight trembled slightly across the polished glass. Beneath the reflection sat an old federal identification card sealed inside the frame beside a bronze commendation medal and a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. "Naomi Carter, Federal Protective Operations Division, Special Crisis Response Unit." Mercer stared at the photo first. Naomi looked younger there, sharper around the eyes, dressed in dark tactical gear with an expression that carried the kind of calm people only earned after surviving difficult things. Below the identification card rested another frame holding a commendation signed by the governor of Texas nearly 12 years earlier for extraordinary bravery during the Riverside hostage evacuation. Mercer's throat tightened instantly. Rain pounded harder against the windows outside. Somewhere down the hall, police radios still crackled softly, but the sound now felt distant, almost underwater. Ryan Keller stepped beside him slowly. "Chief." Mercer did not answer. His eyes remained locked on the clipping beneath the medal. The headline read, "Federal Agent Saves Multiple Officers During Downtown Ambush." There was a photograph under the article. Smoke. Flashing lights. A collapsed patrol vehicle. And there, partially obscured by paramedics, stood a younger Daniel Mercer wrapped in a silver emergency blanket with blood across his sleeve and shock frozen across his face. Naomi stood beside him in the picture, one hand pressed against his shoulder while speaking to another officer. Mercer blinked hard. His breathing slowed unevenly. "No way," Ryan whispered under his breath. Mercer barely heard him. The memory hit all at once. 12 years ago, downtown Dallas. A task force operation gone wrong after bad intelligence sent half the department into a trap. Mercer remembered smoke filling the alley. Remembered hearing officers screaming for backup over the radio. Remembered being trapped behind the engine block of his cruiser after debris pinned the driver's side door shut. Then he remembered someone pulling him free seconds before the vehicle caught fire. A black female federal agent with steady hands and a voice calm enough to cut through panic. He never saw her again after that night. The task force scattered. Files became classified. Life moved on. Until now. Mercer stepped backward slowly, eyes never leaving the wall. "Everybody out," he said quietly. None of the officers moved at first. "Now." His voice sharpened just enough to send the room into immediate motion. Boots shuffled quickly down the hallway. Flashlights lowered. The atmosphere inside the house shifted with visible discomfort. One officer quietly set an overturned lamp upright before leaving the room. Another gathered loose photographs from the floor without speaking. Ryan lingered behind. "Chief, this woman saved cops." Mercer looked at him finally, and for the first time all night, uncertainty cracked through the hard command in his face. "She saved me." The words landed heavily between them. Ryan glanced back toward the kitchen, where Naomi still waited under the flickering lights. "Then why are we here?" Mercer did not answer immediately. He looked down at the printed warrant folded inside his jacket pocket. Anonymous source. Emergency authorization. High threat assessment. Every decision tonight had moved too fast. Too easy. Outside, lightning flashed white through the rain-soaked windows. Mercer suddenly felt the full weight of 30 armed officers standing inside the home of a woman who once risked her life for strangers. A woman who had spent the last decade caring for sick people while the world quietly forgot her name. He closed his eyes briefly before turning back toward the hallway. Naomi was still kneeling exactly where they left her, shoulders tired, hands calm, eyes fixed on the broken front door, letting cold rain air drift slowly into her home. The storm outside began to weaken, but inside the house the tension settled heavier than before. Officers moved quietly now, avoiding eye contact with Naomi as they passed through the living room, carrying evidence bags that suddenly looked unnecessary in their hands. One by one, flashlights clicked off. Radios lowered in volume. The sharp edge that had filled the house when they arrived was gone, replaced by something slower and far more uncomfortable. Chief Daniel Mercer stepped back into the kitchen area and stopped a few feet from Naomi. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The flickering overhead light cast pale shadows across the tired lines beneath her eyes. Up close, Mercer could see how exhausted she truly was. Her hands looked dry from endless hospital sanitizer. Faint marks pressed into her cheeks where a surgical mask had likely rested all night during her shift. She had probably spent the evening helping strangers breathe, while his officers stormed through her front door, treating her like a threat. "You can stand up," Mercer said finally, his voice lower now. Naomi looked at him for a moment before slowly rising from the cold tile floor. Her knees stiffened slightly from kneeling so long, but she did not complain. She rubbed her palms together once, more from fatigue than fear. Ryan Keller quietly approached from the hallway holding a folder. "Chief, dispatch sent updated verification." Mercer took the papers without looking away from Naomi. The silence stretched while he scanned the first page. Then another. His jaw tightened harder with every line. The warrant request was pushed through under emergency threat authorization, Ryan explained carefully. But the source information does not exist in the federal database anymore. Somebody erased the originating profile. 20 minutes after approval. Mercer lowered the papers slowly. "Erased?" Ryan nodded once. "It looks intentional." Naomi leaned lightly against the kitchen counter, crossing her arms for warmth against the cold rain air drifting through the damaged doorway. "That means somebody needed your department inside my house tonight," she said quietly. Mercer looked up sharply. Naomi held his gaze with unsettling calm. "This was never about me." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance as those words settled over the room. One officer near the dining table stopped moving entirely. Another slowly removed his gloves and shoved them into his pocket. Mercer glanced back toward the memorial room at the end of the hallway, then toward the broken picture frame still lying near the couch. "Why did you leave federal operations?" he asked suddenly. Naomi's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not anger, not sadness exactly, just weariness. "Because after Riverside, people stopped seeing human beings," she answered. "Everybody became categories. Threat levels. Statistics. Suspects." Mercer swallowed quietly. He remembered Riverside differently now. The panic, the smoke, the screaming radios. He remembered Naomi carrying an injured rookie officer through debris while bullets shattered glass overhead. She had moved without hesitation that night while others froze. Yet here she stood now in a modest house with peeling paint near the windows, working hospital shifts most people would never thank her for. "You disappeared after that operation," Mercer said softly. Naomi gave a faint nod. "My mother got sick 6 months later. Dementia." Her eyes drifted toward the untouched birthday cake on the table. Some things matter more than badges. The room fell silent again. Ryan looked down at the floor. One of the older officers quietly picked up the broken picture frame from beside the couch and placed it carefully on the table without being asked. Mercer noticed every small movement now. The lowered eyes. The restrained guilt hanging in the air. Naomi exhaled slowly and looked toward the rain outside. "The strange thing is," she said calmly, "none of you looked surprised when you thought the dangerous suspect was a black woman living alone." "Nobody in the room," answered her. "Because nobody could." The rain finally softened into a slow drizzle outside, but the house still carried the aftermath of forced entry like a wound that had not decided whether to close or bleed. Cold air drifted through the shattered doorway while officers quietly moved around collecting equipment they no longer seemed proud to carry. Nobody raised their voice anymore. The sharp confidence that had filled the home less than an hour earlier had dissolved into silence and lowered eyes. Naomi walked slowly toward the dining table and straightened the crooked birthday cake box without speaking. Her movements were careful, almost automatic, like someone too exhausted to process anger properly. Chief Daniel Mercer watched her from across the room with a heaviness settling deeper into his chest by the second. He had led operations for nearly 20 years. He had entered gang houses, hostage scenes, drug compounds, and active crime investigations. But standing inside this small home felt worse than any of them. Because nothing here looked dangerous. It looked lived in, human, warm in the ways police reports never captured. Ryan Keller stepped toward Mercer holding a tablet with fresh dispatch updates glowing across the screen. "Chief, Internal Affairs is responding now," he said quietly. "Cyber Division confirmed somebody manipulated the emergency database remotely." Mercer rubbed one hand across his mouth slowly. "Can they trace it?" Ryan hesitated. "Maybe. But whoever did this knew exactly how to bypass verification protocols." Naomi looked up from the table then. "Which means they knew your department would not question it once they saw my address and profile." The words landed softly, but nobody missed the meaning behind them. An older officer near the fireplace shifted uncomfortably and looked away. Another quietly removed muddy boot covers before stepping farther into the living room, suddenly aware of the dirt tracked across her floor. Mercer exhaled heavily. "Ms. Carter." Naomi raised a tired hand before he could finish. "Do not apologize yet," she said calmly. "Not until you understand what happened here tonight." The room stilled again. Naomi walked toward the broken front doorway and looked outside at the flashing patrol lights reflecting off wet pavement. Neighbors still watched from windows across the street, their porch lights glowing pale against the darkness. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly, "people will not remember that your intel was false." Her eyes remained fixed on the street. They will remember 30 police officers surrounding a black woman's house in the middle of the night. Nobody answered, because she was right. Naomi folded her arms against the cold and continued speaking in the same calm voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Some people will assume I was dangerous. Others will assume I escaped charges because I knew somebody important." She glanced back at Mercer briefly. "Very few people will assume I was innocent from the beginning." Ryan lowered his eyes toward the floor. One officer near the hallway quietly muttered, "Damn," under his breath before catching himself. Mercer stared at the rainwater gathering along the threshold of the broken doorway. He suddenly remembered the way officers had rushed inside earlier. The way guns were raised before questions were asked. The way nobody hesitated after hearing the words "black female suspect." His stomach tightened painfully. Naomi looked toward the memorial room at the back of the house, where her mother's urn sat beneath dim candlelight. "My mother used to say fear makes people impatient," she said softly. "And impatient people stop looking carefully at who they are hurting." Mercer swallowed hard. "Your mother sounds wise." Naomi gave the faintest smile, though sadness shadowed it instantly. She spent 30 years teaching 4th grade in South Dallas. She understood people better than most detectives. Outside, one of the patrol vehicles finally switched off its lights. Darkness settled more naturally across the street again. Inside the house, the silence no longer felt tactical. It felt ashamed. Then suddenly a radio on one officer's shoulder crackled loudly through the quiet room. "Chief Mercer, urgent update from Downtown Command. You need to hear this immediately." The radio crackled again, louder this time against the heavy silence hanging inside the damaged house. "Chief Mercer, Downtown Command confirmed the federal alert originated from inside the department network. Every officer in the room looked up at once. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the broken doorway, while the dispatcher continued speaking through static. Cyber Division traced the authorization key to a retired command account reactivated 43 minutes ago. Mercer's expression hardened instantly. Whose account? A short pause followed. Former Captain Harold Vance. The room went still. Even the officers near the hallway stopped moving completely. Ryan Keller frowned immediately. Vance retired 3 years ago. Mercer's jaw tightened. Not retired, Naomi said quietly from beside the doorway. Forced out. Mercer turned toward her slowly. Naomi folded her arms tighter against the cold and stepped farther into the living room light. Captain Vance handled internal reviews after Riverside. Her voice remained calm, but something colder moved beneath it now. He blamed me for exposing corruption inside the task force. Ryan looked between them carefully. Corruption? Naomi nodded once. Several officers were selling operation routes to organized crews for money. Riverside was supposed to silence a witness before she testified. Mercer stared at her in disbelief. Nobody ever proved that. Naomi met his eyes directly. Because the investigation disappeared after 2 weeks. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Outside, another patrol vehicle shut off its lights, leaving only the soft glow of rain-soaked street lamps outside the windows. Mercer slowly removed his gloves and shoved them into his coat pocket. His hands suddenly looked older than they had an hour ago. You think Vance set this up? Ryan asked carefully. Naomi looked toward the memorial room before answering. I think some people never forgive embarrassment, especially when it comes from a black woman refusing to stay quiet. One of the older officers near the fireplace lowered his head uncomfortably. Nobody argued with her, because deep down, too many of them understood exactly what she meant. Mercer rubbed one hand over his face slowly. He remembered Vance clearly now. Controlled smile. Expensive suits. A man who spoke about loyalty more than honesty. Back then Mercer had been younger, ambitious, eager to trust command structure without asking too many questions. Naomi had questioned everything. And afterward, she vanished from federal operations while the department quietly promoted everyone else forward. Chief, Ryan said softly, holding up the tablet again. There is more. Mercer looked over. Ryan swallowed once before continuing. Internal Affairs just confirmed Vance Access sealed Riverside files last month. Naomi closed her eyes briefly at the mention of the case. The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of refrigerator motors and distant thunder fading farther away. He is scared, she said quietly. Mercer frowned. Of what? Naomi opened her eyes again, tired but steady. Because somebody reopened the Riverside investigation 2 weeks ago. Ryan blinked hard. Who? Naomi hesitated only a second. I did. The words settled across the room like sudden weight. Mercer stared at her speechless. Naomi walked slowly toward the couch and picked up the broken picture frame resting on the table. Cracked glass reflected the flickering kitchen light across her face. I spent 10 years taking care of my mother while pretending I was finished with all of it, she said softly. Then a former witness contacted me last month before he died from cancer. Her fingers brushed carefully across the damaged frame. He finally agreed to tell the truth. Mercer felt his stomach drop. Suddenly the fake warrant made terrible sense. The forced entry. The erased database trail. The timing. This had never been random. Somebody had wanted Naomi frightened, exposed, maybe silenced before she could testify again. Outside, the rain finally stopped completely. The neighborhood fell into strange stillness beneath the dim glow of streetlights. Inside the house, 30 officers stood surrounded by shattered wood, broken trust, and the quiet realization that they had become tools in somebody else's fear. The house remained silent for several long seconds after Naomi's confession. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a radio. The officers who had stormed inside with tactical certainty now stood frozen among overturned cushions, muddy footprints, and shattered wood like men waking from the wrong dream. Chief Daniel Mercer looked at Naomi with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and regret. You reopened Riverside alone? He asked quietly. Naomi nodded once. Nobody else wanted to. The kitchen light flickered softly overhead, while dawn slowly began pushing pale gray light through the rain-streaked windows. Ryan Keller stepped closer, still holding the tablet in his hand. If Vance knew you had a witness, then he needed me discredited before I could testify, Naomi finished calmly. Mercer looked down at the broken picture frame in her hands. Why did you not come to the department? Naomi gave a tired smile that carried no humor at all. Because I spent years watching what happened to people who tried. Those words settled heavily over every officer inside the room. One young cop, near the hallway, shifted uncomfortably and lowered his eyes toward the floor. Another quietly removed the police tape from his belt and shoved it into his pocket as though ashamed to still be carrying it. Naomi carefully set the cracked picture frame onto the table beside the untouched birthday cake. Most people think corruption looks loud, she continued softly. They think it looks like screaming or threats or stacks of cash changing hands. She shook her head once. Usually it looks quiet, protected, official. Mercer felt every word like pressure against his chest. He remembered how quickly command approved tonight's operation. No hesitation, no deeper verification, just urgency wrapped in authority. And they obeyed because authority felt easier than doubt. Ryan's tablet suddenly buzzed again. He looked down quickly. Chief, his voice caught slightly. Federal investigators just detained Harold Vance at DFW Airport 30 minutes ago. Every officer looked up sharply. He was carrying cash, encrypted drives, and travel documents under another name, Ryan. Continued. He was trying to leave the country. Mercer stared at him in stunned silence. Naomi closed her eyes briefly and exhaled through her nose. Not relieved exactly, just tired in the way people become after carrying fear for too long. Then the witness told the truth before he died, she whispered. Outside, the final patrol lights shut off one by one across the quiet neighborhood. For the first time all night, Maplewood Drive looked like an ordinary street again. Mercer slowly walked toward Naomi until only a few feet separated them. His voice lowered when he spoke next. You knew reopening this case would put you in danger. Naomi looked toward the memorial room where her mother's urn rested beneath dim candlelight. My mother spent her whole life teaching children not to stay silent when something was wrong. Her eyes returned to Mercer. I could not ask hospital patients to trust me with their lives every day if I was too afraid to tell the truth about my own. Nobody in the room spoke after that. The quiet carried something different now. Not tension, respect. Ryan glanced around the damaged house and shook his head slowly. We came in here thinking we were stopping a threat, he murmured. Naomi looked at the broken doorway where cold morning air drifted softly into the house. Fear has a way of changing the definition of threat, she said. Mercer swallowed hard, because suddenly he understood the full weight of what happened tonight. 30 officers had entered this home prepared for danger because somebody in power counted on one ugly assumption. That if enough uniforms pointed at a black woman, people would stop asking questions long enough for the truth to disappear. Morning light slowly spilled through the broken doorway, soft and pale against the wreckage left inside Naomi Carter's home. The storm had passed completely now. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalk outside, reflecting the fading blue glow of the last patrol vehicle pulling away from Maplewood Drive. Inside, the officers moved differently than before. Slower, quieter. One by one, they began setting overturned furniture back into place without being asked. A young officer carefully gathered loose photographs from beneath the coffee table and stacked them neatly beside the family albums. Another returned scattered books to the shelf near the fireplace. Nobody spoke much. The silence no longer belonged to authority. It belonged to shame. Naomi stood near the kitchen counter watching them with tired eyes, while wrapping both hands around a fresh mug of coffee she had quietly reheated minutes earlier. Steam curled softly into the cool morning air drifting through the damaged doorway. Chief Daniel Mercer remained near the center of the living room, shoulders heavy beneath his soaked jacket. He looked older now than when the night began. Ryan Keller approached, carrying a small toolbox taken from one of the patrol SUVs outside. Maintenance crew is on the way, he said carefully. Mercer nodded once, then looked toward the splintered remains of Naomi's front door leaning crooked against the wall. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he removed his badge from his chest. The metallic click echoed softly through the room. Every officer nearby looked up. Mercer walked toward Naomi and stopped a few feet away. He held the badge in his hand instead of wearing it now. For years, he said quietly, I told younger officers that good policing starts with protecting people. His voice tightened slightly. Tonight, I forgot that protection without humility becomes fear wearing a uniform. Naomi remained still, listening. Mercer looked around the damaged house before continuing. You saved my life once, and I repaid you by leading 30 officers into your home based on assumptions I should have questioned. The room fell completely silent again. Even the soft crackle from police radios seemed to fade away. Naomi looked down briefly at the coffee warming her hands. Fear makes people move fast, she said gently, especially when power tells them they are justified. Mercer swallowed hard. That is not an excuse. Naomi raised her eyes toward him again. No, she agreed softly. But maybe it is a warning. Ryan quietly stepped back toward the hallway, giving them space. Nearby officers lowered their heads respectfully, pretending to focus on cleanup. While listening to every word, Mercer glanced toward the memorial room where Naomi's mother's urn sat beneath the dim brass light. Your mother raised someone remarkable, he said. Naomi's expression softened for the first time all night. She raised someone stubborn. She answered with the faintest trace of a smile. A few officers exhaled quietly, tension easing just enough to let humanity return to the room. Mercer looked at the broken frame resting beside the birthday cake. I will make sure every report tells the truth about tonight. Naomi nodded once, though her eyes drifted toward the neighborhood outside. Reports matter, she said calmly. But people remember what they feel more than what they read. Mercer understood immediately. Somewhere across the street, neighbors were already whispering behind curtains. By sunrise, social media would carry photographs of police vehicles outside a black woman's home long before anyone learned she was innocent. The damage had already traveled farther than this street. Naomi took a slow sip of coffee before speaking again. The hardest part about being treated like a threat, she said quietly, is realizing how quickly people become comfortable pointing fear at you. Mercer lowered his eyes, because there was nothing honest left to say against that truth. Then, without another word, he walked toward the shattered doorway, picked up a broom leaning against the wall, and began quietly sweeping broken wood and glass from Naomi Carter's floor. By the time the sun fully rose over Maplewood Drive, the neighborhood looked almost peaceful again. Rainwater shimmered along the curbs beneath soft Texas morning light, and the last police vehicles had finally disappeared from the street. Inside Naomi Carter's home, the air no longer carried the sharp tension of the night before. It smelled faintly of fresh coffee, damp wood, and lemon cleaner. Officers who once entered with weapons and commands now worked quietly repairing what they could before leaving. A maintenance crew replaced the shattered front frame, while another officer carefully rehung family photographs along the living room wall. Nobody rushed anymore. Every movement felt deliberate, respectful. Chief Daniel Mercer remained inside long after most of the department cleared out. His jacket hung over the back of a dining chair, while he helped sweep the final shards of broken glass into a dustpan near the couch. The untouched birthday cake still sat at the center of the table beneath morning sunlight spilling through the windows. Naomi stood beside the kitchen counter watching silently, exhaustion resting heavily beneath her eyes. She had not slept in almost 24 hours, yet somehow she still carried herself with the same quiet steadiness that filled the house from the beginning. Ryan Keller stepped in from the porch carrying a small cardboard box. They found these in the evidence van, he said softly. Inside were Naomi's old federal files, photographs, and the framed commendation officers had nearly packed away during the search. Ryan placed the box gently on the table beside her. I thought you should be the one to keep them. Naomi looked inside for a long moment before nodding quietly. Thank you. Ryan hesitated before speaking again. For what it is worth. I am glad we learned the truth before it was too late. Naomi studied his face carefully. Young, honest, still uncertain enough to grow. Truth usually arrives after damage, she said softly. The important part is what people choose to do once they finally see it. Ryan lowered his eyes thoughtfully and stepped back outside to help the repair crew. The house grew quieter after that. Mercer finished sweeping the last pieces of glass and leaned the broom carefully against the wall near the doorway. Sunlight now stretched warmly across the hardwood floor where muddy boots and flashing lights had filled the room only hours earlier. Naomi walked slowly toward the memorial room at the back of the house and paused beneath the framed photographs of her mother. Mercer remained several feet behind her, saying nothing. After a moment, Naomi reached up and lifted the old federal identification plaque from the wall. She studied it silently, thumb brushing across the faded edges of the frame. "I used to think this badge meant people would listen before judging," she said, quietly. "Then one day I realized some people see skin before service." Mercer looked down heavily. Naomi turned toward him again, but there was no bitterness in her expression now, only truth worn smooth by years of carrying it. "The dangerous thing about fear," she continued softly, "is that it teaches decent people to stop looking carefully." Mercer nodded once, unable to deny it anymore. Outside, children waited for the school bus at the corner while neighbors slowly resumed ordinary life beneath clear morning skies. Naomi carefully rehung the plaque onto the wall exactly where it had always been. Sunlight caught the glass and reflected softly across the room. Then she stepped back, folded her arms loosely, and looked toward the repaired doorway where fresh wood still smelled clean against the morning air. Mercer quietly picked up his badge from the table, but did not put it back on. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house stood still around them at last. Not silent with fear anymore, silent with understanding.